Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're going to explore one of the most powerful stories in the Bible, the story of Job, and it's quite an adventure. Job's story teaches us about trusting God even when life feels tough. We'll find out what happened to Job and how he stayed strong in his faith even when things went really wrong. So, let's start our journey. Long ago, in a land called Uz, there lived a man named Job. Job was known as a kind, honest, and good man who always respected God and stayed away from doing wrong. Job was also very wealthy. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. Job was the richest man around, and everyone respected him. But what made Job really special was his love for God. Job's children were close too, and they'd often gather for big feasts at each other's houses. After these gatherings, Job would wake up early to pray and make offerings to God for his children, just in case they had done anything wrong. This was something Job did all the time because he cared about his family and wanted to keep them close to God. Now here's where things take an interesting turn. One day the angels came before God, and Satan, the one who causes trouble, was there too. God asked Satan where he had been, and Satan said he'd been wandering around the earth. Then God mentioned Job to Satan, saying, "Have you seen my servant Job? There's no one like him. He respects me and avoids evil." But Satan thought Job was only good because of all the blessings God had given him. He told God, "If Job lost everything, he'd stop respecting you." So God allowed Satan to test Job, but he told Satan not to hurt Job himself. Satan agreed, and the test began. Soon after, terrible things started happening to Job. While Job was at home, a messenger came running in saying, "Job, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing when some enemies attacked, stole the animals and killed the servants. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you." Before this messenger could finish, another one came in. "Lightning struck and burned up all your sheep and the servants watching them. I'm the only one who escaped." And before he could finish, yet another messenger arrived. "3 groups of enemies raided your camels and took them away, killing all the servants. I'm the only one who escaped." Just when Job thought he couldn't hear anything worse, a final messenger came in with heartbreaking news. "Your sons and daughters were having a meal at the oldest brother's house when a strong wind blew in from the desert. The house collapsed and they're all gone. I'm the only one who escaped." Job was devastated. He tore his robe and shaved his head as a sign of deep sorrow. But even in this sad moment, Job didn't blame God. Instead, he bowed down and said, "God gave me everything, and now he has taken it away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Even after losing everything, Job continued to trust God. Now Satan wasn't done. He came back to God and said that Job still trusted God because he hadn't been personally hurt. So God allowed Satan to test Job's health, but he told Satan not to take Job's life. Soon, Job became very sick. Painful sores appeared all over his body. Job sat in ashes, feeling miserable. Even Job's wife couldn't bear to see him suffer anymore. She told him to curse God and give up. But Job replied, "We should accept good from God and not trouble." Despite his illness and pain, Job didn't say anything bad about God. When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, heard about his suffering, they came to comfort him. But when they saw Job, he looked so different that they barely recognized him. They cried, tore their robes, and sat with him on the ground. For 7 days and nights they stayed by Job's side, saying nothing, because they saw how great his suffering was. After a while, Job finally spoke. He was so sad that he wished he had never been born. "Why is life given to those who are in pain?" he asked. Job didn't understand why all this was happening to him. Job's friends wanted to help, but didn't quite understand why Job was suffering. Eliphaz spoke first, suggesting that maybe Job had done something wrong, because in his mind God only punished those who sinned. But Job knew he hadn't done anything to deserve this suffering. Then Bildad and Zophar also spoke, saying that if Job was innocent, God would make things right for him. They thought Job needed to ask God for forgiveness, but Job was sure he hadn't sinned. He couldn't understand why God allowed all these terrible things to happen to him. Job felt sad, confused, and hurt. But even though he was struggling, Job still believed in God's goodness. He said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job was determined to keep his faith no matter what. Job's story is full of questions we might even ask today. Why do good people suffer? Why does God allow pain? Job didn't have all the answers, but he believed that God knew things he couldn't understand. Job kept his faith, believing that God's plan was bigger than he could see. Job had 3 friends named Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When they heard about Job's suffering, they traveled to see him. But when they saw Job, he was sitting in ashes, covered in sores, and looked so different because of his pain that they barely recognized him. They felt sad for him and began to cry. To show their sadness, they tore their clothes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with Job, staying silent for 7 days and 7 nights. They didn't say anything because they saw how much Job was hurting, and sometimes the best way to be a friend is just to be there. After those 7 days, Job finally spoke up. He was so sad that he wished he had never been born. He asked, "Why was I even born if my life was going to be filled with so much pain?" Job's friends were surprised by how upset he was, and they wanted to help him understand why he was suffering. But instead of comforting him, they began to think that Job must have done something wrong. Job's first friend Eliphaz spoke up. He said, "Job, I know you are a good man, but maybe you did something wrong that made God angry." Eliphaz believed that bad things only happen to people who do bad things, so he thought Job must have sinned. He said, "If you ask God for forgiveness, everything will be okay." But Job knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He was confused and hurt because he loved God and tried to live a good life. Next, Bildad spoke. He thought along the same lines as Eliphaz and said, "Job, if you were truly innocent, wouldn't God protect you? God is fair and he rewards those who are good, so if you ask for forgiveness, God will make everything right again." Bildad meant well, but Job knew that he hadn't done anything bad that would cause him to lose everything. Finally, Zophar, the third friend, spoke. He wasn't very gentle in what he said. "Job, you're talking too much. You must have done something wrong, so why don't you admit it and ask God to forgive you?" Zophar was even more convinced that Job's suffering was his fault. Job felt very alone because his friends didn't understand what he was going through. Even though Job was sad, hurt, and confused, he knew he had done his best to live a good life. He couldn't understand why his friends thought he was guilty of some big sin. Job believed that God was good even if he didn't understand what was happening. He said, "Even if God takes my life, I will still trust him." Job trusted God so much that even in his pain, he believed there was a reason for what he was going through, even if he couldn't see it. Job started asking really big questions, ones we might even ask today. He wondered why good people suffer and why God allowed so many bad things to happen to him. Job's friends kept telling him that he must have done something wrong, but Job knew he hadn't. Instead of getting answers, Job felt more and more confused. Job's friends thought they had all the answers. They believed that if bad things happened, it meant someone had sinned. But Job's situation didn't fit into their way of thinking, and it made them uncomfortable. Job's questions remind us that sometimes life isn't easy to understand, and that God's ways are bigger than we can see. Even though Job was angry and frustrated, he still didn't give up on God. He said, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end, he will stand on the earth." Job believed that one day God would make everything right. Even though he didn't know how or when, he trusted that God would be with him in the end. Isn't that amazing? Job didn't know why he was suffering, but he trusted God anyway. Sometimes we face hard things too, and we don't understand why. Job shows us that it's okay to have questions and feel sad, but we can still trust that God is good and that he has a plan for us. As Job continued talking to his friends, something incredible happened. Dark clouds began to gather in the sky, and soon a powerful storm formed. Lightning flashed and thunder rolled, shaking the ground. The storm was so strong that Job and his friends were filled with awe and maybe even a little fear. They didn't know it yet, but God was about to speak. Job and his friends stood there in the middle of the storm, wondering what was happening. Then, from within the storm, they heard a voice. It was God himself speaking directly to Job. God had heard all of Job's questions, his cries, and even his complaints. Now God was ready to answer in a way that would help Job see the world in a new way. Remember, Job was sitting with his friends, and he was so sad and full of questions. Suddenly a big storm began to swirl around them. Dark clouds filled the sky, thunder roared, and lightning flashed. It was loud and powerful, and right there in the middle of the storm, Job heard a voice. It was God, and he was about to answer Job. God's voice spoke out of the storm, and he said to Job, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with words that lack understanding? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job listened carefully because he knew God was about to teach him something very important. Instead of giving Job simple answers, God began asking Job some big, amazing questions about the world he had created. God asked, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Who decided how big it should be? Who stretched the measuring line across it?" Job didn't know the answers to these questions. He realized how small he was compared to God, who had created everything in the universe. Then God continued, "Can you make the stars come out at night? Can you control the constellations like the Pleiades or Orion? Do you know the laws that govern the heavens? Can you send the lightning bolts on their way, or does lightning report back to you?" Each question showed Job just how powerful and wise God is. God was gently reminding Job that there are things about the world that only he can understand and control. God didn't stop there. He started talking about the animals of the earth, showing Job how amazing his creation truly is. God said, "Can you hunt prey for the lions or satisfy the hunger of the young lions when they crouch in their dens? Who provides food for the ravens when their young cry out?" Job listened in awe as God described how he cares for every creature, big and small. God told Job about mountain goats giving birth, the wild ox that could never be tamed, and the soaring hawk and eagle that see far and wide from their nests. God asked, "Do you give the horse its strength? Do you make it leap like a locust? It laughs at fear and charges into battle, unafraid." Each of these animals, from the great to the small, was created by God with such thought and care. Finally, God spoke of two mighty creatures, the behemoth and the leviathan. Behemoth was a huge animal with powerful muscles, a strong belly, and bones as strong as iron. He was peaceful yet very powerful, moving through rivers without fear. Then God described the leviathan, a mighty sea creature with tough scales and a terrifying presence. God asked, "Can you catch leviathan with a fishhook? Will it make a deal with you? Can you put it on a leash like a pet?" These creatures were so powerful that humans couldn't control them, but God could. God was showing Job that even these gigantic creatures, strong as they were part of his creation and under his control. When God finished speaking, Job was amazed and humbled. Job realized that he had been asking questions about things he couldn't possibly understand. He saw that God was far greater, wiser, and more powerful than he had ever imagined. Job said to God, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be stopped." Then Job confessed, "I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know." Job admitted that he didn't know everything, but he trusted that God did. Job's heart was filled with respect and awe for God, and he felt peace. He didn't need all the answers because he knew that God was in control. God was pleased with Job's response. He saw that Job had remained faithful, even through terrible suffering. God then turned to Job's friends who had misunderstood Job and had said things about God that weren't true. God told them to make a special offering and asked Job to pray for them so they would be forgiven. Job prayed for his friends, and God accepted his prayer. After that, God blessed Job's life even more than before. God restored everything that Job had lost. Job got back twice as many animals, 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. Job also had 7 more sons and 3 more daughters, and his daughters were known as the most beautiful women in the land. Job gave his daughters an inheritance along with his sons, which was a very special gift at that time. Job lived a long, happy life after that. He got to see his children and his grandchildren, even up to the 4th generation. He lived to a ripe old age, full of years, and with a heart full of trust in God. Job's story teaches us some really important things. Sometimes life is hard, and things happen that we don't understand. But like Job, we can choose to trust God even when we don't have all the answers. Job's story reminds us that God is so big, powerful, and wise that he understands things we cannot see or know. Even in the toughest times, we can remember that God is in control. We may not see the whole picture, but we can trust that God does. And because of that, we can find peace just like Job did. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story of faith and trust in God. If you enjoyed learning about Job's journey, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. We'll see you next time for more amazing stories from the Bible.